I'm Charlotte Smith here with Director of Veteran Services, Mr. Larry Hammond. Thank you for joining us here on BladenOnline.com. We're grateful to be here in your office, and we understand that you're a veteran yourself. Can you tell us what branch you served in?
Yes, I can. I was in the United States Coast Guard from 1968 until 1993. I had a little over 25 years. I'm a native of Bladen County. I came out of Bladen County, went to basic training like most veterans do. And 13 years into my career, which I actually found a home in the Coast Guard, I was commissioned, and I retired in 1993 as a lieutenant commander. Very proud to have served.
So where all have you served at? Long list?
That's a great question. Yes, it is. I started in New Jersey, and then from there I went to Elizabeth City, North Carolina, which is the Coast Guard's largest air station. And I trained there to be an aircraft mechanic, helicopters, doing search and rescue. And once I graduated from the school, I went to Detroit, Michigan, actually north of Detroit. But it's called Air Station Detroit, where I did search and rescue operations there for several years. I left there and went to Washington, D.C. for a year in recruiting duty, and then down to Wilmington. That was a good 4 years. I enjoyed working down there. It was working around folks that I knew, doing recruiting, and it was good. As soon as I left there, I was assigned to Coast Guard Air Station Mobile, Alabama, which is kind of odd from the job I was doing because we were in polar operations in Mobile.
What does that mean, polar operations?
We were tasked with putting helicopters on board icebreakers, which were out of Long Beach, California, Seattle, Washington, and then we sailed up above the Arctic and then down to McMurdo, Antarctica. I made both those trips on the Coast Guard cutter Glacier, which was a 310-foot polar icebreaker. We put two helicopters on there, and we were flying operations for the ship. Once a year, the Coast Guard does Operation Deep Freeze. I'm sure most people know that, or have heard the phrase anyway. It's a coordinated effort with the United States Navy and the Coast Guard, and we go down and we actually break a channel in to McMurdo so that we can bring in supply ships that supply them with fuel, oil, and food for a year.
In Antarctica.
In Antarctica. Now, in the Arctic, we were above the Arctic, up around Point Barrow, Alaska, inside the Arctic Circle, and we're doing science operations. There's a lot of science operations that take place. That was an interesting time. Actually went from the top of the world to the bottom of the world and crossed every line, the international date line, Arctic Circle, Antarctic Circle, and the equator in less than 4 months.
Wow.
Not too many folks have done that, but that's what we did.
That's neat.
It was enjoyable. Sailing for McMurdo, it took us 6 months. We left in November and got back in April. So it's a pretty good cruise.
So I'm sure that you've had a lot of interesting stories. Is there a favorite? Is there a couple favorites that you have of
There is.
Your service?
There is. I enjoyed my time on the breaker. That was a lot of fun. But then I was commissioned in 1980. In my first 4 years of my commissioning, I was the officer in charge of the Coast Guard Presidential Honor Guard. They call it the Ceremonial Honor Guard. Each service has a component that supports arrival ceremonies for the Department of Defense and for the President. You have to be cleared to work around the President, and that takes a little while. But after I was cleared, I was working in the administration there. It was Reagan's the first 4 years. I was on the White House grounds when the 52 freed hostages from Iran came back. I did the burial of the Vietnam unknown. It was just a wonderful 4 years, Joint Economic Summit in Williamsburg. And up on the wall, there's a picture there, which is a picture of the Joint Honor Guard staff. We were actually passing in review in Yorktown. There's a celebration that's done every 50 years the sesquicentennial celebration of surrender of Cornwallis to Washington at Yorktown. We had about 4,000 troops that passed in review on that day, celebrating that particular ceremony. That was some fun stuff. But then I left there, took the creased uniform off and put a work uniform on and went down to Florida, and I worked in operations out of St. Petersburg, and we were doing search and rescue, and we're doing drug interdiction out of there, and that was very, very rewarding, trying to stem the flow of drugs into this country. It was quite interesting. Then they decided that I needed a little bit more education. They sent me to school, and I have a degree, associate's degree in computer science engineering. I was transferred immediately back to D.C., where I was the chief of the computer and communications section of the National Response Center. Relatively unknown organization, except we handle phone calls for issues and problems that's coming in the United States from 14 federal agencies. An example was when Captain Hazelwood put the Exxon Valdez on Bly Reef in Prince William Sound, Alaska. We were on that case immediately and had to brief the commandant, who then briefed the President of the United States from information we gave him. So it was a pretty high-pressure job to work those things, and that was fun. Then down to Wilmington, where I was a planner, and I retired in 1993 as a lieutenant commander. Those were fun stories, those were fun times, but they were very rewarding. We did a lot to help this country and solidify what we're doing as far as freedom, and I'm very proud of that.
So what is a few differences from the Coast Guard versus the other branches of the military?
Good question. And that's one that I've answered a lot. The Coast Guard is the smallest of the 5 branches of the military. We are not part of the Department of Defense. We are part of the Department of Homeland Security. We handle everything from search and rescue operations, drug interdiction, aids to navigation, which means these buoys and stuff like that you see. We do all of that, and and we also take part in operations with the Department of Defense during wartime, or when there's a national emergency such as has been going on for years now. We have been involved in all of those. The Coast Guard doesn't operate under DoD for one reason. It's called the Posse Comitatus Act, which says that the United States military cannot have law enforcement authority in the United States. But by being away from the Department of Defense, we don't fall under that, and we have law enforcement authority on the high seas and in our territorial waters for fisheries, drugs, you name it, we have it. We can stop, board, search, and seize on the sea for the protection of our country's fisheries and for boating incidents and things of that nature. So that's one of the biggest factors, is the Posse Comitatus Act, which precludes us from being under DOD's constraints. Now, a lot of folks would say, well, we've got the Navy going out and boarding some of these vessels that are down in the Caribbean and stuff like that. They're military, and that's law enforcement. On those vessels is a Coast Guard person. By having that person on board, that gives them law enforcement authority under our authority under the law. That's the biggest difference.
Okay, that's interesting.
There's only 48,000 of us worldwide.
48,000.
45 to 48,000 worldwide.
Do they do a lot of recruiting for the Coast Guard, or is it the soldiers or the people interested in becoming a member of the Coast Guard have to apply? It's not like the other branches where they do a lot of recruiting.
We do recruit, and we have recruiters in Wilmington, we have recruiters in Raleigh, in North Carolina. They're all over the United States. The Coast Guard, back when I came in 1968, it was during the Vietnam War, of course, it was just full. They had no openings, so you had to get on a waiting list. The Coast Guard is extremely selective about who they're taking. They can be, because they're not taking a lot. But at times it's wide open, other times it's restricted. I'm not sure what the posture is right now, but I know that they are looking for folks that are willing to do the job and do it well. It's a very small organization. If a person is willing to do a very good job being in a small organization, you'll be recognized and rewarded. If a person is in a small organization and doesn't do a good job, that person too will be recognized and rewarded appropriately. So it's a different type of organization. It's a very close organization. I think I've been to places all over the United States and don't know if I've ever been to one that I didn't know someone because of our small size.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for your time and for your service. We appreciate it very much.
You're certainly welcome. I left that job in '93 and have been doing veteran services since that time. So my military time to my time right now, encompassing about 50 years of service to the nation, and I've enjoyed it, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.